Yo, what's going on, fam? Everybody out there, we're back again for the Cannabis Diversity Report. This one right here is a special episode for me, man. This is my good friend, my real dog, somebody that I really actually, in all honesty, man, if it were not for this brother right here, I would not be in the cannabis industry doing all these great things that I'm doing, man. So it's a pleasure to be able to have Kaliko Castille on here to tell his story. Kaliko, what up, my guy?
Aloha, man. It's so good to be with you. I appreciate it. I know it's been a long time coming. I've been really excited to watch you grow the show and happy to pop in here. And yeah, I mean, like you said, it's just we've gone back a ways, and yeah, just really proud of all the progress you've made over these last couple of years, man. I'm really excited for where you're continuing to go.
Absolutely, bro, and that's a good point too, man. Because not even just my career in cannabis, but also this show right here, man. I remember back when I was at NCIA, and I was when I got the role in DEI, man, and we were getting like we had this first week when we were working on our DEI initiatives, and Kaliko gave me the pass to go live on Facebook during the show. And I'd always had this idea about doing this to try to highlight different minority entrepreneurs, and because you were in that position, you let me run with it, man. And like I said, I'm so thankful because it's like it's really given a platform to so many different people and made a difference in the industry, bro.
Yeah, of course, bro. I'm like happy to be part of your story, and I think like for anybody that's watching this, that it also just kind of it points to the fact that this industry and this movement is still very small. And if you're willing to sort of take the leap of faith and sort of show the initiative and do something and really try to push it on your own, you can like take the ball and run with it, right? So that's one of those things where it's like, you know, we were lucky to work on a team where I could hand you the ball and you could go take it as far as you could take it, and you're still running with it, right? And I just think that that's something that people should really keep in mind, no matter what organization you're working at. That like if you show the initiative and are willing to sort of do the work, that it'll put you in a position of growth. So yeah, big ups to you,
Absolutely.
bro, for sure.
Appreciate it, man. And you're the one of your many titles is the board president of MCBA. But over the course of your cannabis career, you've also worn a number of different hats, right? For people out there, Kaliko was the head of marketing. He was the head of strategy at NCIA. This dude has been a dispensary owner, and he also ran for public office at a very young age. So he has so much experience that he could share. Kind of, talk a little bit about your journey. How did you get started in cannabis? What was it that attracted you to it?
Yeah, I appreciate it, man. I think first and foremost, like for me, when I first tried weed after high school, right, I was like I was 17 because I graduated a little bit early. But when I first tried it, that was sort of like the first brick in the wall of ignorance to fall for me, right? I was like, wow, this is weed. Like this is what everybody's been telling me is so dangerous, right? And so like when I first had that experience, it was like, um, sort of mind altering for me to think about like something that we were sort of taught and growing up, it was completely different in reality, right? And like for me, sort of like uncovering sort of the effects of prohibition, I was realizing that later on I found out that my parents smoked weed my entire like childhood growing up, and I never knew it, right? I never knew it. My grandparents smoked weed my entire childhood, and I never knew it. Like there's so many things looking back on it about my childhood that like if I'm looking back now, I'm like, yeah, my family definitely smoked weed. But like, when I found out that my parents and my grandparents were considered criminals, that's when I sort of started going down this rabbit hole of like figuring out what's the history of prohibition and how can we ultimately re-legalize the plant, right? And so for me, I went to a global cannabis march back in 2010, and I went there because I had previously listened to a radio host here in Portland named Russ Belville. He was on a progressive talk show that he had this like one segment that he did called Marijuana Minute, and I was just so blown away that someone was talking about weed on the radio for a whole minute, right? And it's like a nationally syndicated talk show, right? And so he was actually the outreach director for Normal, and was at the Global Cannabis March broadcasting live. And so I went down there to go meet him and sort of just like meet everybody around that scene. And I ended up getting invited into his studio to come just check it out later on down the road. And he eventually was offered an internship at Normal to work under him as the outreach director. So Russ oversaw all of the chapters for Normal at the time. And I was basically in a position of helping him produce his daily radio show for Normal, because he did a daily podcast for them. So this is back in 2010 when podcasts still weren't really big. But Normal had a very like popular podcast. I was helping to produce that, book guests, sort of write the social media stuff and that sort of thing. So that was my first foray sort of into the industry. And I, like you said, wore a lot of different hats. But like the first thing was just me showing up to a global cannabis march because somebody I liked on the radio was broadcasting from there. And then it's really just been all about networking and sort of just weaving my own path since then.
Right. And so from there in normal was like having that, was that what sparked your interest in like going towards and pursuing a political career?
Yeah, I mean, actually, it was before that. I've always been interested in politics. Like, I grew up like being taught history and being like a history buff, and like I was very much like a Civil War geek growing up. So a lot of the stuff we're going through now, I feel like I've like read about in history. Like I've studied sort of the civil rights movement. So I was like always very steeped in politics. But I smoked weed and couldn't be open about it. There was when Obama was president, I wanted to apply for an Obama fellowship, but you had to link all your social media handles where I was clearly talking about cannabis legalization, right? So I couldn't really be open about my marijuana consumption and still do the traditional political route that I wanted to take. So, I think it's been very fortunate that I was able to get involved at a political level, at normal and help sort of do the activism stuff. I did the legalization. I started a political action committee here in Oregon to raise money for legalization in 2012. After that, I went and I started a dispensary. I ran sales and marketing for a bunch of different people, but all that sort of stuff still kind of came from a place of wanting to get into politics, but weed being the place that I felt like if I put all my time and energy into helping to end prohibition, that eventually I'd be able to get back into mainstream politics, right? So, for instance, right now, like being able to be in a position where this is now politically palatable, right? We're talking about the nuances of social equity, and where 5, 6, 7 years ago, nobody knew what social equity is, and all we cared about was it legal or was it not, right? So like we're now in a place now where like we're now part of the mainstream political conversation, right? You had 3 major senators asking for public comments on their upcoming legislation. Like that's real progress. But it also shows that like now we're mainstream, like we're politically palatable. So like I'm actually very fortunate that the company that I run and the firm I run is also doing some work on their mainstream political side. So actually helping them with their digital strategy and basically being able to implement things that I learned in the cannabis movement, sort of teaching myself about digital organizing, I now can apply that to mainstream politics. So it's actually the other way around. I wanted to get into politics, but we'd sort of luckily been my entryway back into that.
Right. And like you said, I think it's a very interesting fact that, social equity, while is on the forefront of every conversation around cannabis legalization now, when you got started years ago, it wasn't like that, right? Like when you talk about normal organizations like I'm at MPP, it all started out with like ending prohibition. What do you think kind of helped to lead to like that advance in thinking, and what were some of the things that happened along the way?
Well, I mean, right now I sit as the board president of MCBA, and MCBA was one of the very first organizations to really center this issue around it, right? So looking back to Jesse Horton, who was one of our founding president, founding board member, now running Loud out here in Oregon. He saw a need for us to have a professional trade association that was speaking to the needs of Black and Brown entrepreneurs, right? NCIA has done a great job of advocating for the entire industry, but obviously the equity community and Black and Brown and minority entrepreneurs in general have a very specific sort of set of needs when it comes to policy recommendations, right? So I think the foundation of MCBA, Supernova Women popping on the scene and doing a lot of big work, right? Nowadays, Caniclusive, right? I just think we've had this progression over the last 5 or 6 years where there's just a lot more people of color who are actually getting into the game, right? And I think as we worked on at NCIA, as we're continuing to do in our places now, like the more we can get Black and Brown and minority entrepreneurs at the table, helping to make the policies, that's when the conversation shifts. So, I think inherently we all know that the war on drugs and the war on marijuana is racist, right? But unless people are actually trying to figure out now how do we actually reverse that, like you're not actually fixing it. It's one thing to acknowledge it and to say, yes, the system is racist. It's another thing to actually have people who are showing up every day doing the work of trying to actually reverse those policies. So, I do think it's like it was initially the foundation of MCBA, Supernova Women, and some of these groups, but now just like me showing up to the Global Cannabis March, half the battle is just showing up. And the more people that show up and are just there to voice their opinions, the more we will be able to show that this is actually what most people believe and believe is right. And so we're like cannabis has always been, we're ahead of the politicians. So that's why it takes us who are on the ground actually being affected by these policies to show up and explain and connect the dots for these folks and let them know, here's why these policies don't work for our communities. Like that's when we're actually going to continue to move the ball forward to where we eventually want, which is equal representation and equal opportunity for everyone to be involved in the cannabis industry, especially if they were somebody who were caught up in the negative side of the war on drugs, if they were previously incarcerated, if they had family members who were, incarcerated, or just communities who were, devastated from sort of all of the effects of prohibition. I do think that we have a long way to go, but we've come a long way, and it's very exciting to know that there's so many powerhouses like yourself and others that you're interviewing on the show on a regular basis who are, out here doing the work.
Yeah, man, and that's such a good point too, man. And definitely got to say big shout out to Jesse Horton, man. Like you said, having the insight, like you said, to know that there was a need for a professional association that represented our needs. I think that was definitely ahead of its time, and it's spurred this where so many people have come out of this movement. Like you said, it's such a small circle. You see the degrees of separation. Even shout out to my girl Shanita Penny, man, because former president of MCBA was been instrumental for me. And like I said, I'll never forget that first lobby day that I experienced at MCBA. When that moment that I saw all the work that y'all were doing, I knew this is what I wanted to do as a career. And just walking up to you, man, and you being so welcoming. And I'm like just learning about lobbying, right? I was like, hey, one of my boys works for a congressman. Should I hit him up? And just learning that process has been just so critical to the movement, right? And like you said, MCBA is really one of the leading voice representing minority issues in cannabis and social equity. What do you think are some of the important issues that impact minority communities when it comes to cannabis that people may not be aware of, and why is social equity so important, would you say?
For sure. Well, I feel like the things that we hear on a regular basis for folks are really the same stuff, and I'm not sure that everybody still understands it, right?
They don't.
Number one is access to capital, right? We hear that all the time. I know there's a lot of different feelings about safe banking and sort of does that help large operators versus small operators? Does it help both? Is it something that helps equity operators, right? But I do think time and time again, we hear access to capital being an issue, right? And it doesn't matter if you're looking at the traditional sort of banking system where it's going to be mostly white folks who are getting good loans or good loans at that, right? And when you're looking at sort of on top of people not having access to capital, not coming from traditional sort of business pedigrees, right? You got a lot of folks who have been in the traditional marketplace, right? Who have been out there and they're doing their thing and they're making money and they're technically business people, but they've never ran a P&L, right? They've never hired a staff, right? They've never filed an LLC. Those are things that are skill sets that we have to be able to, provide wraparound services or technical services so that people actually can run a business, right? And it's not enough just to be able to take care of the access to capital thing. They say, hey, here's a check, figure it out, right? Where in a traditional sort of place, most small businesses go out of business in the first 10 years. That's not even in cannabis, right? So just throwing money at people is not enough. You actually do need to be able to provide them sort of with the structure or the scaffolding to be a successful business owner. And so I think access to capital is number one, technical services and access to professional services, whether that's legal, right? Having access to lawyers who are making sure that you're not writing, partnership agreements that are going to end up screwing you in the long run. Having accountants that are making sure that you're business planning ahead of time and not just trying to backtrack your way later on and figure out all the things you should have done earlier. Making sure that you're preparing for 280E. I just think that those are the number two things the two biggest things that I always hear is access to capital and also being able to have those technical services. And then I think the sort of elephant in the room, right, is access to licenses, right? Because licenses isn't only just about money, because sometimes there's states where it's pretty low on the, in terms of how much money you need to get a license. But there are also some states that have limited licensing, right? Limited licensing means only the most well-capitalized and most well-connected people are going to end up getting those licenses, right? So that makes it tough for any sort of social equity operators, anybody who's a Black and brown entrepreneur who doesn't come from a traditional business background. So I think that those are the biggest things is making sure that we're not limited licensing caps, making sure that we're getting access to capital, and then also making sure that we're doing the scaffolding and the professional services to make sure that people can be successful.
And that's a really good point. And I'm sure you know that from personal experience, having started a dispensary yourself with Brightside. What was it like, starting a dispensary, and what were, some of the challenges that you faced in doing that?
For sure. I mean, well, I'm somebody who never ran a business before starting a dispensary. And we ended up having to shut down eventually due to some local regulations, not being able to have a license within 1,000 feet of you, right? So like there ended up being a situation where there were like 3 people licensed within or trying to be licensed within a 1,000-foot radius. So we ended up losing out in the long run. But that's an example of like a license cap that really doesn't make any sense, right? Like at the beginning, when we were willing to accept anything, as long as it was called legalization, we had a lot of these sort of like regulations in place that don't really make sense. In a free marketplace, if you have 3 dispensaries within a 1,000-foot bubble, one's going to win out and one's going to lose, and one's going to do okay, right? But that's up to the marketplace and up to people to decide. So I think in a lot of ways, I learned how regulations make it tough for people to be able to like prosper in sort of a free market, which is what we all like to think about as like American capitalism, like being able to sort of go out there on your merits and do your best and see how you do. But that was like sort of the first example I had of like, making sure that you have the best team around you, making sure that you have a lawyer and that you're even holding your lawyers accountable, right? Because you have lawyers who are sometimes working with other folks who may be conflicted, right? Like making sure that you're checking up on that, making sure that you're like holding partners accountable, right? Like that's something where if you're doing all the work and you got other people who are partners in the business but not really doing something, that's like that needs to be addressed. Like there are a lot of sort of things that I don't think you can learn unless you've ever ran a business before, right? Like, and I think it's one of those famous quotes like Mike Tyson, everybody's got a plan until you get knocked on the mouth, right? And so I think that's one of those things that I learned, that you really cannot fully learn all of the lessons until you get into it and actually start getting in the mix.
So you made a good point talking about how much politics plays into it, whether you're talking about at the local level or the national level. And I know that there are a number of pieces of legislation on the landscape at the federal level. We have the MORE Act, Safe Banking, and then the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act that have all been kind of in the news lately. Could you talk about what each one of those are and where we are in terms of them actually potentially passing?
Yeah, for sure. I know the MORE Act just recently came up for a vote last week or last couple of weeks, where it came out of committee. So it's like looking to potentially get another floor vote. Obviously, it passed in the previous Congress through the House, but didn't make its way through the Senate. So I know that is still making its way through. I know the Safe Banking Act, obviously, as we've talked about, has sort of been the subject of discussion recently because it was added as an amendment as part of the National Defense Authorization Act, which is basically the bill that funds the military every year. And as part of that, they were able to include it as an amendment. So that's still waiting for approval from the Senate. Not necessarily looking likely. It was definitely worth trying to see if we can get it passed through that, but it's looking like the Senate's maybe not going to actually take that up. And then for the CAOA, the Cannabis Administration Opportunity Act, obviously those folks had put out a call for comments. And MCBA had actually put together about 30 pages worth of comments, sort of taking time to kind of look at as much of the questions that they were asking, as well as adding some more insight to some additional parts of the CAOA that we don't feel like were properly addressed. And just making sure that like any sort of legislation going forward is ultimately taking into account things that we've tried and haven't worked, and things that we maybe haven't tried yet that we think could work. And so some of those things are available on our website. You can check it out if you go to minoritycannabis.org. There's actually a little link to our CAOA comments, and you can actually take a look at there. There's also a summary that breaks down some of the shorter points as well.
And what are some of the ways that, if you are a cannabis entrepreneur or somebody that's looking to get into the industry, that they can be engaged in the process? Because I think, working with MCBA and other organizations is a great way. What type of advice do you have for people that want to, work on that?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, like I was talking about earlier in terms of how my, career started with volunteering, I would just say show up, find an organization that is close to you or like speaks to your, is in alignment with you, and just hit them up. Say like DM them on Instagram, hit them up on Twitter, shoot them in the message and say, hey, this is my name. I'm interested in helping out. Is there any volunteer opportunities? And most of the time, people are going to find a spot to plug you in, right? Like whether that's Minorities for Medical Marijuana, whether that's MCBA, like everybody's like got jobs and willing to help, or willing to have people help who are willing to help. So I would just start by trying to find one of these organizations to reach out. MCBA, we have memberships for as low as $100 a year. If you're an individual member, and that sort of like just kind of gets you into the network, get you access to some of our events, but also have volunteer opportunities. Sometimes we're going to trade shows and can't necessarily always staff a booth because we don't have a huge paid staff. We just have an executive director. So there's always opportunities there that if you want to come help us sort of push that, we'd love to have you. You can shoot me an email, just my first name at minoritycannabis.org. But yeah, I just feel like for folks that want to make a difference, it's just about showing up. So hit somebody up, say, hey, do you have any volunteer opportunities, and go ride the wave. Like, you'll see where you are.
What are some of the things that MCBA has on the horizon coming up shortly where people will be able to participate in?
I'm super excited. And MCBA has actually got a lot of stuff that we're working on. It's been sort of an internal building year because we're planning on going on offense big time in 2022. But we've been working on a project that's sort of low key and that we're going to be announcing here in the next few weeks. But sort of like a preview, what we've been working on is basically a social equity study or survey that basically looks at all of the social equity programs around the country and figures out, what are the pieces of that social equity program, like what are the provisions of it, and if they don't have a social equity program, what are the sort of components of the legalization bill that affect the outcome of social equity, right? So like there are going to be states who don't have social equity programs but have license caps that obviously affects social equity, but it's not considered a social equity provision, right? So when a lot of people are looking at these social equity programs or states in general, we want to be able to start identifying the things that are going into bills that are ultimately affecting the equity of the outcome of equity, right? So we're putting together this pretty massive report that we'll be putting out soon that basically looks at 40 different categories across all of the states and all of the municipalities that touch social equity or don't have legalization. And we're basically evaluating what's working, what's not working, right? Because this is what we hear from everyone. People want to know like what's working in social equity. And this is like the first time that someone's taken a comprehensive look and as broad of a look as we are to make sure that we are identifying that stuff. And that's actually going to roll up into the next phase, which is redrafting our state model policy bill. So in 2018, MCBA put out a MCBA state model policy bill that was developed at one of our policy summit. We brought together a bunch of stakeholders from around the country to sort of put their best ideas forward for what, if we could wave our magic wand, a state legalization bill would look like. So we're actually going to be taking the findings from the survey, bringing back together a bunch of stakeholders during Cannabis Week in Vegas coming up here. And we're going to actually be redrafting that model policy so that by the January sessions of the state legislatures in 2022, we will both have a report that shows exactly what's working, what's not working, and what we need to be aware of at the state level, and a model policy bill that says, here's how you can address these things and how we think you can properly implement an equity program at the state level. And so those are two big things that we're putting together right now internally that I think is going to lead to a massive 2022. And so in December, we are also planning our very first MCBA annual member meeting. So we're going to be bringing together MCBA members to sort of talk about what we're working on, what our goals are for the future, and we're going to be having a small sort of award ceremony as well for leaders in the equity movement. So I would just suggest come be a member of MCBA, go to minoritycannabis.org, sign up, because we're going to be inviting all of our members to that event in December. And part of that event is also going to be some grassroots organizing training, to where we're actually going to be putting together sort of an army of grassroots volunteers to go out into these states with that model legislation and with that social equity report, and actually be able to start informing their local representatives, legislators, whether that's at the city level or the state level or beyond, right? So what we're really trying to do is use this year to sort of build up all the tools that we feel like we need to make our community successful, and then try to train up some volunteers so that in 2022, we really hit the ground running. Because I think what we've really noticed lately is we're just spread thin, right? MCBA has been an all-volunteer organization. A lot of these organizations have money come through, but they're nonprofit, so we're always trying to do a lot with a little. So this is sort of our effort to make sure, like, how can we empower those of us who are not like directly working in the day-to-day of MCBA at a volunteer level, but on their own accord can go out there and make a difference in their own communities and help, bring equity and bring opportunity to communities that right now are, not being heard from.
And are there any trends, I guess, that you see like early emerging that maybe you didn't expect from the data that you're seeing from the research, and like based on like some of the newer states that have enacted social equity rules that are meant to help people that have been harmed by prohibition? Is there anything that you see in like new places like New York, New Jersey, Virginia that makes you hopeful and that you think have been like best practices?
I mean, that's a great question. I'm not as nearly read up on all of the like upcoming things. Virginia, New Jersey, sort of the East Coast stuff. Like Amber Littlejohn, our executive director, is like the policy wonk, and she's totally into that. But in terms of like
wonk, she is, man. She's a genius.
Absolutely. And so like that, in terms of like some of the trends when we're looking at the data, I think one of the biggest things was license caps. You're literally not going to be able to achieve equity in a state that has a license cap. Like it just in the sort of on its face, the definition, you're just not allowing opportunity for everyone, right? And so I think that's something that we're seeing like is in a lot of limited license states. Florida, right? Like you name them off. We all know what the states are. But like that's sort of one of the biggest things. We got to make sure that we're not allowing for license caps. And then it's also like the sort of pricing of the barrier of entry of like licensing, right? If you're gonna have to pay 50 to 100,000 or more to get a license, it's going to be less likely that minority operators are going to get licenses, right? In states like Oregon, where it's only like $5,000, like that's a little bit more reasonable and people can make that, right? So I do think like the trends I think we inherently understand exist, but now we're actually being able to put them on paper and show with the data that this is actually leading to unequal opportunities and unequal distribution of licenses. And then until we actually change those policies, we're not going to get and achieve that sort of ideal that we have for equal opportunity.
Right. And in addition to the policy work that you're doing with MCBA, I know you've had the opportunity, like you said, with your original passion being in politics. I know you've had some opportunities recently to get to kind of get back engaged in policy conversations, even outside of cannabis, with your company Thunderstorm. Talk a little bit about Thunderstorm. What is it, and what are some of the things you're working on?
Yeah, appreciate it, man. So, I mean, I left my job as a director of marketing in August of last year, so we're a little over a year into it, to start a digital marketing and communications firm called Thunderstorm Strategies, basically just teaming up with one of my childhood buddies to start a company really focused on helping people create a digital strategy, whether it's for your cannabis business, a non-cannabis business, or a political campaign, to really help you get your message out. And I think like in the age of COVID, we all really got hit with the face how much you have to have a digital strategy in order to survive, right? If like the world were to ever shut down again, if you don't exist online, you really don't exist, right? So for us, we've been able to do that. We've had success on the cannabis side, obviously doing that in my regular day job, but now being able to start pitching political campaigns to do that work as well. So we're actually running a governor's race here in the state of Oregon that just launched last week. We're really excited about that, and that's sort of like, an opportunity for us to show what we've learned in the cannabis industry, but bring it back into mainstream politics. And the hope, obviously, is if we can be successful in this race and find some other races to be successful in 2022, we'll be able to sort of broaden that out and broaden the scope. And ultimately, from my perspective, it's really, I'm trying to build a machine that helps myself and the community sort of put our thumb on the scale for things that we care about, right? If I feel like if I can build this machine that like my friends can lean on to build up their businesses, or my like elected officials that I believe in can lean on it to grow their campaign and ultimately be elected to make an impact. For me, it's not just about marketing, it's about what are we marketing to make an impact. So working for MCBA, Normal, a governor's race, these are the sort of things that I think like allows me to do what I'm good at, but also make a difference in the world, as part of the business. So it's been really exciting. It's been a year into it. We're growing slowly but steadily, and really excited about what's in front of us. I appreciate it.
Yeah, man. And is there anything else going on like across the industry that you're working on that's super cool that you want to highlight?
I think the things I'm most excited about really are this social equity report that we'll be putting out, and this model policy that we'll be putting out as well. That's sort of like where all the focus internally of the organization for MCBA is right now. And I think that these are going to be two products that we're going to put out that I think are going to be very impactful for the future of the industry. Very much continue to look forward to working with you to roll this stuff out and get it out into the hands of people who need to see it. Yeah, I mean, I think that's it. Like if people could just be tuning in to minoritycannabis.org, we're actually going to be relaunching a new website in the next couple of weeks. We have a new member portal that we're going to be launching in the next month. So like I said, we're really very much focused on building internally this year so that 2022, it's all offense, and we finally get to be able to make sure that we're making as big of an impact as we know we need to.
Yeah, man. Sounds like you're definitely busy. Like y'all are definitely busy at work, implementing new programs. And even on top of that, man, you're busy about to be a new dad, man. How's that feel, bro?
Yeah, man, I'm super pumped. I appreciate it. I know you're a girl dad, and you're one of the girl dads I look up to. So I'm really pumped to have our daughter. She's due on November 13th. She's got the car seat in, getting ready, getting the room put together. My wife's looking beautiful, and and their belly's getting large. So it's just we're very excited, and yeah, I think for me it's kind of I think as everybody who's been a parent before definitely helps you to sort of like shift your perspective a little bit. So I think like for me, I'm very much focused on the bigger picture and making sure that we're always moving things forward. And not getting too caught up in the things that don't really matter on the day to day, right? So I think I'm really excited about the daughter coming, but also just the fresh perspective it's bringing about like what's really important. And obviously during the pandemic, I think we've all realized how important family is, and really excited to help grow ours. So,
For
yeah,
sure, man.
that.
And getting ready to be a parent, when you think about cannabis, how does it change your perception or anything? Have you thought about already, like how do you talk about your kids about cannabis and what you do like in the industry and all those types of things?
Yeah, man. I think like, it's something I always thought about before. I was like expecting to be a parent. But I think now that I'm like, becoming, ready to become a parent, I do think like this is something that we'll be very open and honest about. And it's going to be part of this, just like what happens here, right? And I think it's going to be treated similar to alcohol. And I feel like, being able to, it's not like we're going to be smoking in front of the baby. We're not going to be smoking inside the house when the baby's around, right? I think just being a responsible cannabis consumer, right? And it's like, it's also like whether it's a baby or another human being, another like adult human being, like it's just common courtesy, right? So like one of the things like I found myself doing, it wasn't even conscious. I'm smoking outside. I used to like smoke my bowls in the house all the time, but now I'm pretty much smoking exclusively outside because there's no smoke in the house, right? So like I think that's something that maybe subconsciously is like starting to change like already. And then I think for me, it's just probably going to be use, right? I'm somebody who's used a lot. I consume a lot on a regular basis. So I do think like, if anything, I'll just be a little too busy to probably be consuming as much as I have in the past.
You'll definitely be busy, man. Definitely be busy, but good busy.
Yeah, absolutely, man. And yeah, I think like if I had to like leave one thing for everybody that's like watching this, really, it's just like my story really is about showing up and just like networking and like building relationships, right? Like you and me being able to just meet at an MCBA lobby days and sort of like have a really awesome friendship since then. Like, this industry, I think, is something that I say industry, but it's movement, it's whatever you want to call it, right? I think this community is something that pulls you in for your own reasons, right? Everybody's attracted to this industry for their own reasons, and I think if you just keep showing up and just keep marching on your own path, you're naturally going to run into the people you need to meet who have the sort of the next sort of step of insight for your journey. So I just want to put it out to everybody that like even if you're starting with nothing and no one in this industry, just trying to get into an event and volunteer and just beginning to network is like the key to unlocking everything. And so like literally, even if you have nothing, just try to volunteer, and I guarantee you'll find a way to get where you need to go.
That's so true, man. That formula worked is worked for so many people, man. So I definitely appreciate you sharing that, Jim. And it's great to get to highlight you, man, because I know you're always behind the scenes doing things, man. You're not the type of guy that, that even cares, I think, about what, people know the work that you're doing. You're always head down trying to do the work. So, it's definitely good just to highlight you, brother, and talk about some of the dope stuff you're doing, man.
Yeah, I really appreciate the opportunity, bro, and continue to be proud of all the work that you're doing. Super excited for your journey. And yeah, hopefully we'll get to do it again when we roll out some of these products and have some more information to share with folks. And, I'm very much looking forward to 2022. I think it's going to be a big year for us.
Absolutely. And can you let folks know where can they follow MCBA? Where can folks follow you and even Thunderstorm online?
Yeah, I appreciate it. MCBA, you can just go to minoritycannabis.org. All of our socials are listed there, but we're pretty much at Minority Cannabis on most platforms. And then my own personal social, you can follow me at Kaliko. And then you can be able to find sort of any links to Thunderstorm there. But yeah, please do follow along with MCBA. If you can join as a member, whether that's at an individual level or corporate level, please do consider it. We're very heavily focused on policy, whether that's at federal level or now also making sure we're revamping the state level policy stuff. But that work takes money, and that stuff happens through our membership. And we're very fortunate to have some really awesome members who have members for a long time. But even if you're not a Black or brown entrepreneur and you're just an ally and believe in a more equitable industry, your company should still be joining MCBA, right? And I think that's one of the things that, like in the past, hasn't probably been as open for people or like as clear for people, that you don't have to be a Black or brown business owner to be a member of MCBA. You just need to believe in equal opportunity for everyone. And then, I would just say join us so that we can help keep doing the work we're doing.
For sure, man. Well, again, thank you for coming through. Thanks to everybody at MCBA. Big shout out to Amber. I know you're always doing so much work too. Appreciate everything y'all are doing to try to, like you said, make an equitable, inclusive industry for everybody. And that is something that shouldn't matter. It doesn't that you don't necessarily have to be from those communities. It's just something that makes good sense and that people should do, man. So
well, I'll just add one little thing, right? Like in the sort of post George Floyd era, right? Like every white person is looking for a way that they can do a better job. I feel like so most people are looking for a way to do a better job and a way to show up as an ally, and this is the way to do that, right? You can't hide from the conversation or hide from the sort of the situations. You got to dive in feet first and just get to know folks and start to have those conversations. And we welcome anybody who's willing to work towards a more a more equitable future.
Absolutely, man. Well, yo, bro, thank you so much for coming by. I know you got to get the house ready. About to have a baby here any day now. Looking forward to seeing you in Vegas. Right? And tell Sarah I said what's up, man.
I definitely will, man. So appreciate your time and sending lots of good vibes on your journey, and look forward to seeing you in person soon, man.
Yes, sir. Be easy, bro, and everybody out there. Peace.